I'm a mental health nurse by background, and I've worked in Manchester sort of for the last 30 years or so. It was interesting to hear Noreen refer to the incident that happened in the Arndale. It's amazing the memory, isn't it? Because actually it was over 20 years ago that happened. Incredible how time passes. So I was involved in supporting people in relation to the Arndale bombing. I'll just run through some numbers in relation to that, and then remember those numbers when Alan gets to his talk and talks about some of the numbers that we're seeing in terms of the arena incident. So as part of that 96 bombing, 102 people attended a hospital on that day. People were screened later, and 74 people were screened. 25 people returned measures. 2 of them were children, 2 declined, 2 improved, and 5 people were invited for treatment on the basis of their scores. All of those people improved, but just remember those numbers. And that was a huge incident that happened in Manchester, an incredibly terrifying ordeal, but remember those numbers when it gets to talking about what we've been seeing recently as part of the arena. I guess I'm here because I have a role with the Strategic Clinical Network, and I'm the adult mental health clinical lead for the Strategic Clinical Network that sits across Greater Manchester. And this was really an opportunity where the whole of the system across Greater Manchester came together, and was a situation where the Strategic Clinical Network was able to facilitate some of those, but it was a real opportunity for that whole system-wide approach to really demonstrate how it can kind of mobilise when such traumatic incidents come about. So you'll all remember this was a concert that was by Ariana Grande. Ariana is a singer who typically appeals to a younger population. Certainly I'd not really come across her. I'd heard my children kind of make reference to her, but it wasn't someone who I was very au fait with, and it really appealed to a younger population. The Manchester Evening News Arena is really a central hub for large kind of musical and kind of theatrical events across the north of England, really. Certainly that place that the bomb went off is somewhere that I'd certainly drop my kids off. It was a place that, having lived in Manchester pretty much all my life, that was, one of the first concerts I'd really felt comfortable letting the kids go to, and I'd been there. And lots of people, not just in Manchester, but around the north and the northwest, had lots of familiarity with that evening news arena and that kind of that central way of getting into it, and people knew it. People knew what was going on. So it had resonance with lots of people. It's also important to note that actually this was an incident that happened in Manchester, but actually because of what it is, because it's the evening news arena, lots of people came from around Manchester. Lots of people came from Yorkshire, Humber. We know that people came further afield than that, and Alan will make reference to that later on. So there was an immense organisational response. The kind of the system absolutely pulled together immensely. So not just the NHS provider organisations, but the VCSE community, all was desperate to see how we could support people following this incident. In the early stages, we focused very much on kind of making sure the system was capable of sustaining itself. So a focus on people who were first responders, people who kind of been there and supported people, ensuring that we could sustain the system to keep helping kind of individuals who were there. But we also wanted to ensure that we kind of utilised some of those great messages that were put forward by Noreen about that notion of psychological first aid and how we got that psychological first aid into the system, into the wider community. And that was one of the things that we wanted to ensure that we did. We developed very much as a phased-based approach through the organisation, and we focused very much on that kind of notion of normalising, about supporting people in the early days. And you may well kind of remember some of the things that we did. You may have come across some of them. So we had that city-wide response from all provider organisations. We had a universal offer, and we wanted to manage as well some of that external offer that came. We had literally daily, we had responses from external organisations saying that they wanted to help people of Manchester. And I think Noreen also referred to it, that, you know, in Grenfell they had lots of people turn up saying that they could do counselling or they could do all sorts of interventions. We had that in Manchester. We had people turn up wanting to do things unto people. And we would constantly say, well, that's fantastic, it's a really great offer, but can you demonstrate where that fits into in the clinical pathway that we have developed? And if there was no sense of where that fitted into in terms of our clinical pathway, we declined that offer. But it still didn't stop people putting up stalls, doing things to people, and really we had no real notion of what was being done unto people or control over some of that. We did as much as we could to stop those things and close them down, but it was a daily occurrence where we had to write letters to organisations and decline their offers of support, whilst bearing in mind that actually there were some great offers of support and how you kind of weeded those out. But there were literally hundreds of offers, many of which were kind of really quite flimsy in terms of what they were offering and potentially could have been doing some real harm. And certainly I don't think advertising what they did very, very well at all. But as part of that initial offer, as part of that community support, what we saw immensely across Manchester were the number of opportunities where people had a real sense of community, a sense of the community pulling together. This is some of the kind of scene from St Anne's Square where people laid wreaths and flowers and testimonials and teddy bears, and lots of those things have been collected. I was speaking to someone from, I'd come across a musologist. I'd never heard of a musologist before, but I was contacted by someone who's a musologist who works at Manchester Museum and kind of specialises in collecting archives of things. And they collected the archives of all of the material that was left there, including, you know, all the kind of pieces of paper that people had written, beautiful notes and saying how much they'd been kind of thought about. But these things were immensely valued by people. People felt supported. People felt a real sense of the community supporting them. And that was immensely beneficial to people. Lots of people kind of talked to us and said that it was a really helpful thing in my early stages of getting through this, that there was a real sense that community was kind of wanting to help and support. There were all sorts of other things. Ariana Grande herself returned to the city only a few weeks after in an immensely brave kind of response, and did a further concert that was supported by people from around the world, you know, kind of incredible kind of artists from around the world. And that was another form of support from the community that was really valued. But what we also know is that, again, relating back to that fact that actually people came to this event from across the region, actually what we started to see was that people who were in Manchester really started to feel some of that support. But if you were further afield, maybe you felt a little bit distant from some of that. I guess that's just saying what I've just said, really, but on a slide. So some of our key approaches in the early stages were starting to kind of work with people in a psychosocial kind of way, starting to promote that notion of caring, started to really emphasize those notions of normalization. I guess you've already heard that, you know, lots of people who've been through traumas will get better, will improve. And we wanted to ensure that people heard those messages and got that normalizing messages out there. Actually, lots of the media wanted to promote lots of really kind of fairly difficult portrayals of people who are really kind of struggling, and lots of the kind of awful aspects. And what we wanted to promote in those early stages was very much those messages that actually it's a normal process. Some of these kind of symptoms you're experiencing are to be expected. What we want to do is support you with that, but you don't necessarily need to go into a full-blown kind of episode of therapy right at this point in time. So some of that ability to self-soothe, how we can do that, and particularly because we had a younger population and working with schools, was really important. We worked very, very close with a whole range of agencies, and as I said, the whole system came together. We worked very closely with victim support, who set up a helpline, and we also established what we wanted to do was kind of think, we need to think beyond just the initial response here. We need to think beyond this initial phase of responding. And what we set out to do in the early stages was look at a more long-term way of ensuring that people were supported. Because we know that lots of people will kind of get better, but we also know that some people will struggle, will absolutely struggle with that. And what we didn't want is people to kind of struggle with those difficulties and have long-term complex trauma and not be supported. So very quickly, as a group, our clinical advice to the system was to establish the Resilience Hub that could provide that ability to have a long-term approach to screening and treating people over a period of time, to find people that were struggling with their difficulties and stream them into treatment as quickly as possible. And this was part and parcel of what we hoped to achieve. That actually came about immensely quickly for a system. Again, it's already been kind of pointed out that after Manchester, there were incidents in London. There was not only Grenfell, but there was the Borough Market event, and there was the event at Westminster Bridge. We know that in London, what they've done is they've taken our clinical pathways that we've developed. They've pretty much crossed out Manchester and put London. We were very happy, immensely happy to share all the work that we've done, but they were very grateful for that work that we've done. They've set up a very similar kind of hub, or I say set up, they're in the process of setting it up. Ours has been in kind of in situ for a number of months now. It's actually delivered the first part of the screening kind of program. It's already done that. London, they're still kind of, in the process of setting it up. As a system, the whole system across Manchester worked effectively together. We worked with our commissioners to say, well, this is the thing that we need to do. This is the right thing to do clinically. And we had the system say, well, let's underwrite it. Actually, interestingly, Pennine Care, GMMH, North West Boroughs have still not been paid for lots of the work that they've been doing. They, as organisations, have kind of taken the lead on this and said this is the right thing to do. We are working to ensure that we get that payment out there to people. But actually, it's been a very tricky kind of process. It's not been straightforward, but the system itself came together immensely well. So the Resilience Hub has been set up in this incredible building at the kind of an old swimming baths venue, which is very beautiful. It was actually visited recently by the Prince, and you just spot Alan peeking out behind there in the background. He's been lording it up with everybody recently. But the great thing is, what it has done, it's attracted attention. It's attracted a lot of attention, the model that we're utilising. In terms of screen and treat methodology, it's still in their infancy. The last time a big screen and treat programme happened was following Tunisia incident, which was on the beach in Tunisia. Now, interesting, that screen and treat methodology took some time to be mobilised. It took a long time for it to be mobilised into the system. Actually, the people who kind of wanted to do the contacts had to go into the Ministry of Defence in order to get the names out and kind of then contact those individuals. We have a very different situation. We had a ticketed event where we knew lots of the cases. It was still a nightmare working with the ticketed people to get that data out, but we've worked immensely hard, and people have bent over backwards in order to get access to those individuals, in order to follow those individuals up. DH was very uncertain about screen and treat, because of those terms, screen and treat. They felt that screening probably wasn't the right way forward. We kind of disagreed. And they also thought that actually the system is set up to treat those individuals. And I guess what we're very much doing with the hub is kind of offering a model of assertive outreach. We're assertively outreaching people who are struggling, and we think that's absolutely the right way forward to minimise long-term complex trauma. This is pretty much what I've said. What we're trying to do is ensure that we have a screen and treat methodology over a year's time frame. We want to do it longer than that, but we kind of got a kind of an agreement to do it over a year. We're screening people at 3, 6, 9 and 12 months with validated measures, and that's what we're hoping to sustain over a 2 to 3 year kind of programme. Whether that happens, we're not sure. It's a constant dance between commissioners to ensure we've got the money. But I guess I just want to, many of you here have probably contributed in some way, shape or form to the hub that has identified people and passed them on for treatment. So it's an opportunity to say thank you to you guys as a system and as recipients of those kind of hub referrals to support people following that arena. So huge thank you to you guys. Thanks very much.